Okay, so I think everyone listening here would already be familiar with the 9/11 attacks, but as it is a pretty famous event, which kind of altered the geopolitics and the economy of the entire world. And Pakistan, especially, was facing a lot of internal and external challenges at that time. So, in this topic, I will be discussing about how Pakistan's foreign policy has been changing after 9/11. So, to briefly put things into perspective, I will be talking about what actually happened on that day and why it happened and what were some of the immediate impacts of it. And so, in the morning of 9th of September 2001, there were four coordinated terrorist attacks that happened around USA. Four airlines were hijacked, and two planes crashed in the Twin Towers in New York, and one of the planes crashed in Pentagon, and the fourth plane crashed in an empty field. And uh, after these attacks, 19 militants were caught by the American government, and it was later found out that these militants were working under the Islamic militant organizations known as Al Qaeda, uh, which was led by Osama bin Laden at that time. And the casualties were around 3,000 people were killed and around 6,000 people were injured. So Osama bin Laden, the head of Al Qaeda, was actually reported on saying that he wanted to ban the permanent presence of infidels in Arabia, which could tell us that he wanted to retaliate against the presence of American troops in Middle Eastern countries. And he actually claimed that America supports Israel and America supports Muslim atrocities around the world, like the recent Lebanon attacks that had recently happened at that time. So today, whenever a terrorist attack happens anywhere in the world, Muslims are always associated with it. So 9/11 could be a reason for it because after 9/11, Western media immediately claimed radical Islam as the immediate enemy, and we can see where this leads to that. As Pakistan is also a Muslim country, and along with other Muslim countries, they were immediately associated with the countries which sponsor terrorism and provided a safe place for terrorists, and this continues to impact the foreign policies and interactions of Muslim countries around the world today. After the attacks of 9/11, the media was using terms like an unprecedented tragedy, a heinous crime, because America had never faced such a huge loss, and uh, such an event had never happened that with such a high magnitude and loss, and US lost over $20 billion, and America was a major nuclear power at that time, and it had to make some important decisions that could alter the politics of the entire world. So we can say that America was actually overwhelmed with anger, and President Bush had to uh, react in some sort of way that would compensate for all the loss that had occurred. You can see the statements here on the screen that President Bush made, which shows us his determination of how he wanted to eradicate terrorism from around the world. And he was ready to implement some action-oriented solutions and some measures uh, that would start a counterterrorism campaign, which is today known as the war on terrorism. The Secretary of State, Colin Powell, at that time publicly announced that other countries should not provide any ambiguous statement that they are not linked with the fight against terrorism. They should provide a clear answer. And George Bush also said that if you are not supporting us, you are actually supporting the terrorists. So that being said, Pakistan, a special focus was brought onto the association of Pakistan with the Taliban of Afghanistan. And the Secretary of State, Joseph Biden, warned Pakistan that it had to choose whether it wanted to be a friend or whether it wanted to be an enemy. So President Musharraf had to decide whether he wanted to support USA or whether he wanted to support the Taliban or he wanted to adopt a policy of non-involvement. But he had to think carefully because the consequences were grave. So according to President Musharraf, 9/11 came as a thunderbolt for Pakistan, which presented very unique opportunities and challenges for Pakistan. Well, eventually, Pakistan came to support America in the global war against terrorism, and the first step was to eradicate terrorism from Afghanistan, which was a neighboring country of Pakistan. And so US gained access to Pakistan's military bases, the naval bases, and classified information against the terrorists. And as a result, USA also waived all the sanctions that they had applied in Pakistan in 1998, and they also received a lot of financial help in trade for trade, food, agriculture, and education in the form of foreign aid. And as a result, Colin Powell also mentioned that it was a start of a very strong relationship. And President Musharraf showed his support by banning all the terrorist movement in Pakistan. And in 2003, a 5-year, $3 billion US package was announced for Pakistan. And in 2004, President Bush designated Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally um, against the global war on terrorism. And in 2005, this is another example of the strengthened relationship between Pakistan and USA, that Bush authorized the sale of F-16 fighter jets for Pakistan. So historically speaking, Afghanistan has always been a very conflicted and chaotic sort of state. But especially after the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, the international community had kind of abandoned Afghanistan and left them at their own fate to deal with everything, which actually led them to be in a even more conflicted state. And but Pakistan always tried to help Afghanistan in these times when they negotiated many peace talks and settlements. And as an example, they signed the Islamabad Accord in 1991, and Pakistan preserved its effort to bringing peace in Afghanistan. But the continued chaotic state and the led it to be sort of a breeding ground for religious extremism and terrorism, and they soon developed ties with Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and Pakistan actually had to cut off all ties with them because they were supporting the USA in the global war against terrorism. So their relationship kind of weakened. But recent example, Pakistan has pledged to donate $100 million in aid to Afghanistan for its reconstruction and institution building, so the relationships are improving. So the politics of Pakistan has always been very kind of India centric and revolves around India. But after the attacks of 9/11, India was trying to blame everything that was happening in Kashmir on Pakistan, and they blamed that the terrorist attacks happening in Kashmir and the Kashmiri liberation struggle was particularly associated with Pakistan's link with terrorism. So they were trying to make weaken the relationship of Pakistan and USA, and Pakistan was actually trying to do the same. But it was also accused of Pakistan was also accused of using the money that America was giving to it for strengthening the defense against India. And but India was also supporting America on the war against terrorism, and India also received a lot of help from USA. And but USA actually wanted peace between Pakistan and India, so the global war on terrorism is not affected. So they tried to encourage some negotiated some peace settlements between Pakistan and India, and this encouraged Prime Minister of India in 2003 to lend a hand of friendship to Pakistan, and things were going good at that time, but for Pakistan and India. But at that time, terrorist attacks happened in India, and Pakistan was blamed for them for the attacks, and things kind of deteriorated at that point. And the civil nuclear deal was signed in 2008 between India and USA was actually seen as a sort of a disturbance for Pakistan, because Pakistan also didn't want that the relationships of USA and India to improve. So I previously discussed about the relationships of Pakistan and USA, but it was more associated with fear and blackmail. But Pakistan actually kind of benefited from the whole thing. But after 2004, USA had done a lot of airstrikes and drone strikes in Pakistan, which actually led to many civilian deaths in Pakistan, which faced a lot of backlash. And also in 2004, the Abdul Qadir Khan, the head of Pakistani nuclear power, confessed that he supplied nuclear technologies to countries like Libya, Iran, and North Korea. So America wanted to arrest him, but it just declared Pakistan as a major ally. So it allowed Pakistan to have him in a home confinement sort of state. And in these moments, Pakistan was in a dialogue mechanism sort of state where it was signing peace treaties between different bordering areas, uh, and it was launching a military operation in Waziristan, and it was and in 2006 Musharraf visited America and Bush visited Pakistan, and they had a lot of negotiated settlements. But in 2007, US launched another airstrike which killed 11 parliamentary soldiers of Pakistan along with 8 Taliban. And all these strikes and deaths caused a lot of faced a strong reaction among Pakistanis, that and it completely deteriorated the mutual trust that Pakistan and USA had. And so in response to that, in 2009, the US Congress approved a $7.5 billion worth of aid to Pakistan over the next 5 years via the Kerry Lugar bill. Yeah, but this bill was also uh, revolving around the conspiracy that this bill aimed to deteriorate the civil-military relationships of Pakistan. But between the span of 2002 and 2010, Pakistan has actually received aid of $18 billion from USA. So after 9/11, China was not ready to bear the financial cost of propping up Pakistan, but the USA was. So Pakistan kind of focused more on supporting USA in fighting the global war on terrorism. But it did not mean that Pakistan did not cooperate with China. It did. Pakistan had its strategic interests in mind, and it actually um, did a lot of projects and developments with China. Uh, and China actually helped Pakistan combat terrorism. And while Pakistan was fighting terrorism, it had an opportunity to improve its relationship with other countries in the European Union, and countries like Russia started to acknowledge Pakistan as a civilized country which now didn't have any sort of religious extremism. And recent examples are the CPEC is a good example to see the improved relationship between Russia, China, and Pakistan. So, an American securities contractor visited Pakistan in 2011 and he shot two Pakistani people, and this sparked a lot of outrage among Pakistanis. Uh, and this actually threatened the relationship between Pakistan and USA. And the assassination of Salman Taseer in 2011, when he committed blasphemy, was also considered to be a thing in which Pakistan was believed to be a country which does not care for any sort of human rights, and still believed in religious extremism. And Osama bin Laden also was captured in Abbottabad in Pakistan when US Navy SEALs adopted some policies such as fake polio vaccine policies of um, trying to find when they were trying to find Osama bin Laden, and they did succeed in finding Osama bin Laden and captured him and killed him. But Pakistan was again considered to be a sort of a terrorist country because it was Osama bin Laden was actually living there. And another major thing that happened in 2011 was the Salala attack, which was a major military checkpost attack on Pakistan. Uh, the major attack on Pakistan's military checkposts when a lot of soldiers died and there were a lot of casualties, and Pakistan actually made a decision that it would no longer provide any sort of help to NATO after this incident. And in 2012, it banned all the supply routes to NATO. Uh, and NATO actually plays an important role in fighting global terrorism, and it is an alliance of 28 countries bordering the North Atlantic Ocean. And but even after this, United States even used more drone missiles to kill several of the Pakistan's wanted militants. They were succeeding in eradicating terrorism to an extent from Afghanistan and Pakistan. but it led to a lot of casualties. And but in response, then they had to propose another foreign aid of $860 million and some other counter-insurgency funds. Um, so President Trump said that the Pakistani people have suffered greatly from terrorism and extremism. We recognize those contributions and those sacrifices, but Pakistan has also sheltered the same organizations that try every single day to kill our people. So Trump was still biased that Pakistan is still the reason for global terrorism and violence. But in recent times, Imran Khan has developed a stance that he opposes the presence of American military in Afghanistan, and the Pakistani government actually favored a negotiated settlement with the Taliban. So the Pakistani army recognizes this as a more of a Pakistan's vision of a strategic depth, improving relationship with Afghanistan. And so the representatives of Taliban and the Kabul government were tasked with negotiating a ceasefire and political settlement with some of the people from America. And Prime Minister Imran Khan and General Bajwa recently facilitated this peace treaty in Doha in September 12, and they discussed about the ongoing regional and international support for the historical opportunity of peace. And the embassy also said that it would end all the US Taliban conflicts, and the US troops would withdraw from Afghanistan by the end of April 2021. And so to conclude, I would say that Pakistan actually needs to overcome all of its domestic weaknesses through political reconciliation with other countries. And its foreign policy has always been inclined towards USA after 9/11. And because of the Indian threat perception and the military influence over foreign policy, its foreign policy is always been affected by terrorism and other things. But now it started a more the counter-terrorism movement. It had an opportunity, and now it has adopted a more proactive and pragmatic approach in its foreign relationships that helped to create a more diplomatic comeback on a global level.